friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 19 of my 2024 holiday card series. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Penguin Party, Snow Cool, Beachy Christmas, and Christmas Fishes. So I've stamped those images I'll be using on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm starting with the black parts of my penguins, and I decided to go with cool grays for today. I'm using C5, C7, and C9. So I'm going to add that C9 down the back of their bodies and a little bit on the underside of their fins. And then I'll start to blend that out with the C7, just pulling that color forward, making sure to catch the edge of the previous shade and kind of pull that into the midtone so we don't leave behind any harsh lines. I can also do little scribbling motions to kind of break up that line a bit too, always with those darker colors. That's a risk, so I try to be really careful to blend those out. And then I'll come in with my lightest shade, the C5, and I'll fill in the rest of the black parts. And that will add a nice little highlight on the top of their heads and the top of their wings and the edge of their belly. So I'm going to fill in the other penguin. I wanted to mix up the colors today. I recently did another penguin card using these Lawn Fawn penguins, or similar ones anyway, and I used, I think, the toner grays for those. So I just wanted to show you a different gray that you could use. And for the baby, I always like to go a little bit lighter since baby penguins are usually gray. So I'm going to use C0, C1, and C3. And I'm kind of creating a little heart shape on that baby penguin to mimic the mom and dad. So I'm just leaving a little bit of white space around the eyes and the belly. Then I'm going to continue using these colors. Since we are making a New Year's card today, I wanted to go with some colors that don't seem too Christmassy. So I'm going to have some silver in there. So I'm going around and just adding that to the palm tree and the string of lights, and also the lights that are on that sandcastle. And then I'll move on to the white parts of my penguin, and for that I'm going to use E40 and E41. I'll use that E41 closest to the black for a little bit of shadow, and then blend forward with the E40 and let that fade into the white cardstock for the highlight. And then I will color the conch shell up above with those shades, again just leaving a little bit of white space. And I will also color in a few of the other accessory images, like the center stripe on the surfboard, just pulling that color in from the top and the bottom and leaving the center white. I'll also do the paper of my snow cone, and then I'm going to do more of the lights in this kind of creamy white shade. So I'm just kind of counting out where I want those to go. I'm going to use 3 different shades on each of those strings of lights. So I'm skipping so that we have a few left over. And then I'm going to switch to orange for the penguins' beaks and feet. I'm using YR14 and YR18 for that. Since we are doing a warmer kind of climate scene, I wanted to go with warmer oranges. The whole idea behind this card was that I have done so many snowy penguin scenes, but I have never done a beachy warm weather penguin scene. And so I just thought that would be something really fun and different. And since we are finishing off the holiday card series today with this New Year's card, since it will be after Christmas by the time you guys are watching this, and so I just decided to do something a little bit fun and different for myself and go with a beachy penguin scene. So I've switched to some warm brown shades. I'm using E53, E55, and E57, and I will do the trunk of my palm tree. I'm just carefully coloring around those strings of lights. And I will also do the door of my igloo, which will be a little bit unexpected as well. But anyway, the door is just going to be a normal door, and so I'm just highlighting the different planks of that by leaving a little bit of white space on each of those boards that I will fill in with this highlight shade, which is going to be the E53. So I'll fill in the rest of the palm tree and then come over and fill in the door. And again, I really like those nice warm shades for the warm climate scene. The only thing that I really went cool with was the penguins, which just adds a nice little bit of contrast. So I did darken up the combo and used E55, E57, and E59 for the coconuts. I just wanted those to be a bit darker so that they stand out on that palm tree. And then I'm going to go with a lighter version in the same family. I'm going to use E50, E51, and E53 for my igloo because warm weather penguins would have an igloo made of sand, wouldn't they? That just seems to make sense to me. So I'm going to color this to look like sand. So I'm adding that E53 in the shadows of each of those little bricks. I'll also add it to the chimney. And while I have the marker in my hand, I will also add the shading to my sand castle. So next I'll bring in the E51 and just start to blend that out and just soften that color up a bit. And I just thought that was kind of like a fun and different idea. Like I said, since it's going to be the new year, I just wanted to go with something, I don't know, a little bit different. And I don't know, I always feel a little bit braver when the new year starts for some reason. I feel like anything is still possible. And it just makes me want to step outside my comfort zone a little bit more and try something a little bit different. So once I have all of that blended out with the E50 for the lightest, I'm actually going to go back in and add some little dot details. I'm using the E53 first, which is not going to show up super well, but it will add a little bit of texture and we'll darken that up in a minute. So I'm just adding a few little dots in the shaded areas of the bricks and also a few on the chimney and the sand castle to give it some texture. And then I'll come in with the E55 and add a few more right over top, kind of mixed in between those lighter ones. And I think that provides a nice bit of contrast too, which just gives it that sandy texture and makes it look a bit more like what I'm going for a sand igloo. I did that on the sand castle as well, and then went back and added a few to the chimney. I didn't want to forget that. And then I am going to switch to some pink shades and give these penguins some rosy cheeks using R00 and R21. And that didn't turn out quite dark enough for me, so I am going to darken that up a bit and bring in the R22 as well. I'll add that to the cheeks and then I'll blend back out with the R21 and the R20 to really soften that into the creamy tone of their fur. Then I'll switch to some darker R20s. I'm using R24, R29, and R39 for all of the red bits. So I'm going to do the rest of the light bulbs on all of my strings of lights. And yeah, I just wanted to have this scene be a bit decorative, even though by the time this video goes up, it will be after Christmas and the theme will be New Year's. I don't know if you're like me, but a lot of our family get-togethers, because, you know, when you have like bigger family and friends and things like that, a lot of our get-togethers kind of fall between Christmas and New Year's. So a lot of people keep their lights up and their decorations up, you know, into the new year. I actually take mine down on New Year's Eve. That's my tradition. But as as of the posting of this video, they're still up. So anyway, I am just trying to make them a little bit less Christmassy. I still have the red in there, but rather than going with, you know, more traditional like red and green and or like the brightly colored lights, I decided to go a little bit more muted by having the silver and the white mixed in. And that's why I also felt like it was okay to have some of those wrapped gifts still in the scene, because they're still having family celebrations. It's not quite over yet. Of course, I had to give them a little snow cone, because if they're not going to have snow for Christmas, not going to have a white Christmas, they should at least get a snow cone. But I did want to make it a little bit brighter by adding in some of that R22. And then I do have to add a little bit of green into this scene, because we have things that need to be green, like the top of the palm tree. And I also threw in a little bit of seagrasses in there too, because I knew that I didn't want just one thing to be green. So I wanted to have a few little echoes of that, and also just provide a little bit of color and scene building elements. So I am using G40, G43, and G46, placing that G46 in the center of the palm tree where all of the fronds are attached to the trunk, and then it'll get lighter as they go out. I'm also going to add some green to the top of my pineapple and to the seagrasses. And I'll just blend out with that G43 and finish with the G40, which has a really nice, really soft tone to it that I think looks not too Christmassy as well. It's a little bit less of a traditionally Christmas green. Then I wanted to have a little bit of gold in the scene for the new year, so I'm bringing in YR20, YR21, and YR23. I'll add that to my pineapple and to the center stripe on my ornament. I'm going to color the shovel in yellow as well, or gold. For the pineapple, I just blended out with the YR21 because that bow is around the center. It wouldn't really have too much of a highlight, but I did add that YR20 to the shovel and the band on the ornament, and I also added the YR23 to the doorknob and the windows on the sandcastle. And then I decided to color in the fish gold as well, because I didn't want to introduce another color into the scene. So the only thing left is the top of the ornament, which I went back to my C3 for, and the other stripes of my surfboard, which at the beginning I hadn't decided what color I wanted that to be, but I ended up deciding to just go back to the red tones. So I pulled those same shades back out, and I am just going to color those in quickly. You can see my markers are getting super dry. I am really hoping to do a marker maintenance day very, very soon in the week between Christmas and New Year's, because it is desperately needed. And then I will grab a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and go over the eyes of my penguins that have their eyes open. And I will trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm starting with a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock, and I have trimmed that down with one of the simple stitched hillside borders from Lawn Fawn. And I'm going to blend on some Distress Oxide ink. I am using antique linen to start and bringing that in from the top. And I will eventually cover this whole panel with that. Now, normally when I have colored sandy things in with Copic markers, I would also color the background sand with Copic markers so everything matches. But my markers are just way too dry. I knew that there just wasn't enough ink left in them to do a big background scene like this. And so I am using Distress Oxide inks instead. So the sand isn't going to completely match, but I am trying to do my best to get in the same kind of tone. So I brought in some vintage photo to darken things up, and then blended back over that with the antique linen. And then I'm going to press some of both of those inks onto an acrylic block, add a little bit of water to that, mix it up with a thin paintbrush, and I'll tap that all over the background so it also has that same sandy texture as the not snow, but the sand igloo and the sand castle, like I did with the Copic markers, adding that dot detail. So once I'm happy with how that's looking, I will set this piece aside to dry and clean up my mini media mat. And then I'll bring in my next piece of Bristol, and this one I have trimmed down with the stitched simple wavy borders. And I am going to bring in some peacock feathers Distress Oxide ink at the top. This one is not going to show the whole piece, so I wasn't too concerned with the bottom. I did fill it in, but I wasn't worried about how the blend was down there. I was just more worried about the top. And then I'm going to darken that up with some Uncharted Mariner. Just bringing that in on that stitching detail, really highlighting that, and then blending back out with the peacock feathers once again. And I'm not going to do any splatter on this one. I'm just going to leave it smooth so that it looks like waves. And then I'm going to bring in my final panel, which is just a full sheet of Bristol. And I will bring in some Salvage Patina Distress Oxide ink, because this is going to be my sky. I flipped that over just because the bottom edge was a little bit rougher from the cut, and I knew that it would get covered up with the sand later on. But anyway, I'm just bringing in some of that Salvage Patina at the top. I'm using a newer ink foam on that blending tool, so it's not loaded up with ink, so it does take a little bit more effort to get that ink to lay down. But I actually don't mind the cloudy look of it because it's a sky, and so cloudy actually makes sense. I did add in a little bit of the peacock feathers just from the ink that was left over on that blending tool. I did not add any extra ink from the pad, but I just wanted there to be a little bit of depth at the top and the two sides, and I'm just making sure to really blend that back out with the Salvage Patina. So now that all of these pieces are done, I'm going to assemble this background. So I'm going to take the sandy piece and add a little bit of glue to the back of that, line that up over top of the wavy border, and then I will take this whole piece and add that to the background. I'm just trying to make sure that it is on there nice and straight. There was a little bit of an overhang there at the bottom of the wavy piece, but I'll just trim that off with my scissors once I have everything lined up. So I'm just going to make sure that at least one side is completely straight, and then I can trim off the excess. And then I'll pop that in my Misty, and I'm going to put together a sentiment combined from Beachy Christmas and Yeti or Not. And I'm going to stamp that in Versafine Onyx Black ink because it lays so nicely over Distress Oxide inks, and a lot of inks don't. But this one does, so I'm going to stamp that down, and the phrase that I put together says, "Warmest New Year wishes." And I'll stamp that down twice to make sure it's nice and bold and legible. And then I'll set that aside to dry and pop my card base in my Misty. I'm using Lawn Fawn Mermaid cardstock and stamping in peacock ink. And this time I took a penguin from Penguin Party, and then the sentiment says, "Have a relaxing winter," and that is also from Beachy Christmas. And again, I'll just stamp that down twice, and then I'll set this aside as well. So now I'm ready to start putting this card together. So I will take that background and glue it to my card front. It is an A2 standard size card, 4 1/4 tall by 5 1/2 wide. And I'll just kind of squeeze the corners together to make sure it's on there nice and straight. And then I can bring in my images. And I am going to keep everything on this card flat for easier mailing. So I am just going to take my largest images, which are also going to be the furthest back in the scene, and I will adhere those first, just kind of placing them evenly from the edges. So the palm tree is going to accent that sentiment by kind of almost pointing to it with that palm frond up top. And then I'll have my igloo over on the right hand side. And I will add the string of lights over the door. I did accidentally make a mistake adding that igloo so far over to the right because I completely forgot about the surfboard, which I had wanted to have propped up against the igloo over on the right. And if you know anything about Distress inks and Distress Oxide inks, they react with water or anything wet. And so it's very hard to pull something up once you've placed it down using liquid glue because it kind of pulls the ink up as well. But I was able to shift it over just enough to squeeze in that surfboard where I had wanted it. And luckily the surfboard covered up any of the Distress Oxide that I messed up. So whoops, but anyway, all's well that ends well. I'm also going to add a little bit of seagrass on the other side of that igloo just to balance it out a bit with the surfboard. And then I'm kind of arranging my penguins and my sandcastle down in front because those are going to be the main images in front. And I would just want to make sure I have everything placed where I want it so that I have room for all of the other little accessory images. I'm going to put the mom over toward the right, and then I'll put the baby in front of her. Kind of a similar positioning to the cold weather Lawn Fawn card using penguins that I recently did. I kind of wanted to do almost like the opposite scene. That one was definitely North Pole, and this one is South Pole. So instead of the Christmas tree, we have the palm tree, and instead of the nighttime scene with the aurora borealis, we have like a daytime summery beachy scene, and just little things like that. It kind of is an homage to that card, but still kind of stands out on its own. It also is in a completely different orientation. The other one was portrait style, and this one is landscape. So yeah, I just thought it would be fun to do like a North Pole versus South Pole kind of thing. Anyway, I'm going to finish decorating this scene by adding these little gifts. I'm going to place the fish over near the surfboard just to pull some of those details over toward the right side as well. And then I had two more of these little seagrasses. I decided to add those right at the top edge of the sand. So that one is tucked in near the surfboard, and then this other one will be tucked in over on the left. Just made sure to have the shadow down toward the bottom. And then my original plan was to give the snow cone to the baby, but then I didn't want the two red objects right next to each other with the sand pail and the snow cone. So I decided to break those up by adding it to the mom's hand instead, and just pushing the baby a little bit forward, but not too much again because of that Distress Oxide ink. I also wanted to add the little smoke coming out of the chimney. I just thought that would be a fun detail. And there was too much empty space in the sky for me, so I decided to grab this little bird from Smooth Sailing and stamp that a couple of times in the sky to kind of fill up that space. And then of course it still needed some sparkle, so I'm going to add some Stardust stickles to my ornament and all of my lights because they need to be sparkling bright. I'll also add it to the ribbons on my gifts and the snow cone. And that is going to finish up this card, so I will lift that up and show you in a little bit more detail and also give you another peek at the inside. And this is the last day of my 2024 holiday card series, but it is not my last card of the year. I will be back tomorrow with day one of my 2025 Valentine card series, and I will also have a year in review video before the end of the year. If you enjoyed this one, please be sure to give it a like and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted when I post new videos. All the products I use will be listed and linked down in the description bar below the video in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. Happy New Year, everybody. Bye-bye.